There you go. Recording is in progress. I want to make sure my screen is shared here appropriately. Let me make sure that that shows. Can we see that okay? Oh, wait here, I've lost my chat window. I want to make sure I can see the chat that's going on here. So to actually start to make sure that, because this is going to be a highly interactive conversation, the goal here is to really look at formative assessment practices, and especially to be thinking about these in terms of what we're seeing, both in terms of face-to-face, but also in virtual and hybrid environments. So before we jump in, just to give a little bit of warm-up time and get everyone started, I'm wondering if you would take a moment and in the chat window, what are 4 adjectives that you would use to describe you? And I've put my 4 already there. I mentioned at the keynote earlier today, proudly nerdy and happy to be so. I like to think I'm curious and kind and energetic. I certainly get that feedback from folks. So in the chat window, would you share what are your 4 adjectives that you would like, or you maybe aspire for, to describe you? I'll give you a minute to do that, and then we'll jump into the work. Thank you, Jessica. See, someone's in now. And I know there's a minute here to just think, what would you use to describe yourself? So I like the fact that you used alliteration, Kelly. That's awful nice to use the 4 C's. Well done. Now, part of my reason for asking you to participate in the chat is this session, we're going to do some things together. We're going to watch and observe, we're going to share, and we're going to build some ideas together. So I want you to feel comfortable here sharing in the window, because your contribution here is part of the collective work we're going to do as we talk about assessment practices. So thank you, Donna, and thank you, Gina, for throwing in your 4 adjectives there. I love loyal, that's great. I'll give another 20 seconds or so, but you can still chime in here. But I want to make sure we have time to explore the resources that I plan to show you today. So thank you, sister. I love loving is your first one. That's wonderful. And this is, by the way, icebreakers are one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about in environments. One of my favorite ones is that I get from Curtis Bonk, who's done research on online learning for 2 decades and more now, is an activity called 8 nouns. And so if you were going to have 8 nouns that describe you, what would that be? And most people can do the first 3, 4, 5, and then they really have to think about what else would be a good descriptor for me. So, it's a great activity to get individuals thinking about who they are and what gets them excited about themselves and how they think they represent. So the goal of this session is we're going to talk about assessment practices in particular. And I'm going to share with you, there's been a lot of workshops that I've helped organize and run over the last couple of years to help teachers and schools think about what their assessment practice looks like. And so I'm going to show you a range of ways to think about that. And we're going to do a few of them in a bridged form, because this is only a 45-minute workshop. So in a sense, my goal here is to expose you to some ways that you might look at assessment and to give you some new and exciting resources. I hope that will help you think more deeply about the ways that you're going about the process of doing assessment in your work. I just want to give credit where credit's due. In our work with Cupoho Academy, Lee Fitzgerald, John Cheever, and Edna Hussey were instrumental in the design of these artifacts you're going to be working with today and exposed to. And at the beginning, I showed on my initial slide, it had a link or a web address to go to find the PDF of this presentation, where all of the documents I'm going to share with you. I'll make sure I insert that twice more, and I'll put it in the chat before we're done here today, so that if you want to go back and look at any of these things or find them useful. So we're going to look at some protocols. We're going to generate, this is going to be a very generative workshop. So our goal here is, what things can we create together to talk about what formative assessment tools might be helpful? And then we're actually going to try and practice a couple of these, at least in thinking about how we would use them. So you'll see what that looks like when we get there. to sort of just back up and talk about assessment and sort of my lens or my bias on this. If you've seen this graphic before, it's one of my favorite as we think about what it means to do assessment. And we have a big discussion on our own campus about the difference between fair and equal. And giving all students one kind of assessment may or may not be the most fair way to assess learning. And so when we develop our assessment practices that we use in our classroom, especially if we're doing things where students are active learners and they're having an opportunity to really do higher level thinking and Bloom's taxonomy, creating and generating and ideating, that we need to think about the means by which we collect evidence of that learning. In our work, we've really taken time to think about assessment not of learning, but for learning. And so when we today think about assessment, we're talking about formative assessment. I was just talking to one of our principals yesterday about this and about how important it is to understand that when we talk about formative assessment, it's meant to be a means to give both feedback to the learner and to the teacher about how well are we doing in helping them get to the learning. In what ways are we identifying for them places where they're strong, places that they can improve on? And so this idea of a formative assessment is a critical one. And a lot of teachers have struggled with this when we've gone online because we've had to change the means by which we're doing this. In the work we're going to talk about today, I want you to think about this. You might be familiar with this triangulation idea of assessment, where we have three means by which we can collect evidence of student learning and through that be able to give students feedback or identify gaps or strengths in where students are at. That includes the products, the artifacts that they create. So those could be written things. They could be, observing a chat in a window in a Zoom or a Google Meet. It could be watching the way that they're creating things in a shared document and ownership. So there's those kinds of things that they create. We also have the conversations that we observe. So we have opportunities for both watching peers talk to each other, as well as our opportunities to have conferences and conversations with students. Tell me more about that. Why did you say that? So those become our conversations that we can use to collect evidence. And then we also have, even in the virtual environment, observational opportunities where we can see how students are working, sharing. Maybe it's in a breakout room, maybe it's in a collaborative document. And so in the work we're going to do here today, I want to show you some ways that we do that, both in how we develop workshops to help teachers think about this, but also challenge you to do some of that work. So we're actually going to look at 4 different activities that we've done over the years with Kupuho to help teachers think more deeply about assessment practice. We're going to do 2 of these in abridged form. One of them is going to be a fishbowl, which we're going to start in a second, and you'll see the others in a minute. The thing I want to let you know is, even though we're not going to do all 4 of these, I've given you the documentation for them. So if you see one of these that you like and you think, boy, I'd love to do this with some of my team, my grade level team or my department level team, so we can sort of talk about how do we reach consensus around what quality work looks like, how do we support students, then I've given you these so you can pick and choose things that might be most useful for you. So the first activity you're going to do right now, we call a fishbowl. And what we typically do with this is we have a task we have some participants do while everyone else is watching this activity happen and considers the ways that assessment might happen with that activity. And then we do some speed dating activity. This is when we do these face-to-face to have people talk about ways and ideas that they came up with that they might assess learning and what they saw. The actual activity sheet is here. So I'm going to post this in the chat right now. I'll try to remember to do these, but you can always remind me if I don't remember to post. So this document is a little bit longer. If you look at it, it takes about 45 minutes to do. So we're going to do an abridged version of it, but it has the same elements. So let me show you what that abridged version looks like. Oh, I accidentally clicked on the link there. Give me 1 second. I got to jump back to my document. So here's what we're going to do right now. We're going to observe a task for a little less than 5 minutes. And then normally we would do this where if we were in a conference room together, I would actually have a group in the middle do this, and we would do this physically. But given that we're online today, we're going to just watch a videotape of something that's a learning in an environment where students are actively learning. And while you're doing that, I want you to be thinking about what kinds of assessments what kinds of evidence, conversations, discussions, observations, artifacts might students and the teacher generate to help them understand what the learning is looking like during that activity. So that's your goal right now, is I want you to watch this video of students in action, and then I want you to be thinking about where might there be opportunities to collect data, to collect evidence. So this is a video footage of a teacher in an elementary classroom having students explore the topic of sound. And I'm gonna, this tape is a little bit long, so I'm gonna cut to the 12-minute mark here, where she's, after explaining what we're doing, you can see the essential question is, how do we hear sounds? And so I'm gonna have you observe. So your job right now is watch what the students are doing, watch the teacher, and consider where is there opportunities to collect evidence.
And then a little bit harder.
And can I see someone in the chat just tell me the audio is okay? You can hear that?
Reminder. Okay, so is everybody ready for their materials?
Yeah.
No questions? You're ready?
I see thumbs up.
So
Good, thank you.
what are some of the materials that you need? What do we need first? A cup. Okay, so why don't you pass out one cup to everybody, please? What was another material that we needed? Yes? Rubber bands. Okay, I have some really nice thick rubber bands. You can pass out rubber bands to everybody. And what was another material that we needed? Yes?
Tin foil.
Good, right, because I put plastic wrap, but plastic wrap is really difficult.
Yay.
So tin foil, and I cut them, and will you please pass out so everyone can... When you finish constructing your cup, what should you do next?
And put these.
But you're gonna have to raise your hand to ask.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll know you're right. And then, once you have it constructed and you have your beads or your rice, you can begin experimenting.
Now you want to take time here and think about, if you're the teacher in this classroom right now, what are you looking for? And how could you even add to things here to improve your ability to collect evidence as this is happening?
Want to trade again? How do you want to make? I have I don't know what to do. We need cookies. Thank you. I do.
I'll take it. Did you make sure you have one?
We have this type of bucket.
Please raise your hand when you have it constructed and you need some beads. I'm going to use beads today because they're so nice and colorful and they don't smell like chicken like our rice.
Yummy rice and
You there and you can begin experimenting.
and yellow.
Oh, sure.
So now just push it down a little.
Start experimenting. Oh, you know what? That was Ready? Start experimenting. You might have to press it a little bit harder. The beads.
That's why this seat is really hard, right? It's a big lever. joining them.
Are you not participating?
I do it. But I need
So I'm going to stop it here, although this plays out for another 15 minutes of exploration. So the question that I had before you was,
So, today's lesson
is what was the list of ideas? So the way we're going to collect this right now is we're going to use a Padlet. And I'm assuming most of you are familiar with a Padlet platform. So I'm going to give you the address for this. And instead of us doing this with chart paper, which would be a way we would do this if we were face to face, in the chat area of the Zoom, this is the link for this Padlet that you see. And what I would like you to do is to consider, where in that lesson did you see opportunities where you could collect observational, conversational, or artifact data that would support? And by what means might you do that? So I'd love everyone right now, you have an opportunity here to do two things. One is to offer an idea, and another is there's the comments feature put on. So if you see someone offer something and you have something to say to that, then by all means come in and add to that. So I'm going to add a few things here as well, but I can see someone's already started to jump in and seeing the circulating. So let's see what other things we can come up with here in no more than 5 minutes of time, but let's see how many assessment ideas we can create. So just as an example, I'm putting in one here that says students drawing what a working one looks like. So I might be able to collect that evidence as for each student, if were they able to show me what they built. So what other things, and keep in mind, we have two things we want to think about when we use this. One is it a means for us to give feedback? Is it a means for us to assess learning? So in what ways, if we're doing something like talking to students, and you notice the teacher doing that, are we able to have them give us information that lets us assess, lets us literally sit beside them and get a sense of where they're at on understanding this? As these are added, this Padlet is designed so the most recent ones will go up top, just so you know, so you see things come in. And if you see one you like or you want to comment on one, by all means, use the comment feature. I'll do that a little bit here too for this next couple of minutes as we see some of these get built in. I am a big believer in the phrase genius, which is sort of this idea of the genius of a group that is collective, that collectively the best work we do in our profession is when as a team, as a community, we share and learn and come to collective understandings of the ways that we support each other and the ways that we can add to each other's ideas. So some of this work in our own campus has been spent with grade level teams, with discipline level teams, thinking about what this looks like. This work, just even in thinking about, what am I missing that I might be able to collect? Just having those informal conversations with colleagues can really help us deepen and broaden our thinking around what kinds of evidence are we collecting in the work that we're doing. So we see some of these here, right? Like observing, have the students voice record. That's a really interesting one, right? Using voice. And that's allowing us to bring up a different way that we might collect evidence. Just even something as simple as following the directions. One of the documents that I have in my classroom, which is very hands-on project-based, is I have a checklist of behaviors that map to learning outcomes, like asking questions that indicate adding to others' ideas, or using multiple means in order to solve a problem. And so I have ways to both check and give students feedback over the course of a hands-on activity that allow them to get feedback from me. So think of these not just for you to collect and put a grade on, but more importantly for you to use as a means to give feedback or to recognize maybe there needs to be clearer sets of instructions or resources or clarity at a table about what roles students might be having. I'll give about 30 more seconds here for things to add, and then we're gonna move to the next step. One of the things, while we're waiting for those last couple of opportunities for things to come in, as we've had to move to virtual learning, many of us, or at least hybrid learning at some level, sometimes we see them face to face, sometimes online, is what of these things that we're saying, or what of the things that we used to do in the past, have we been able to do online that allow us to still collect multiple means of evidence? In some ways, it's thwarted us because so many of our instincts as teachers have been observational. We are used to being situated with the learners, and we can read body language and voice. We know when someone's in a corner of a room by motion or by the indication of the sounds that are happening, where something might or might not be happening that we want to attend to. So in virtual environments, knowing just how we might do that. And by the way, I saw someone comment about Flipgrid. It's a marvelous tool for those of you that aren't familiar with it, as a means to have students record and comment on each other's work, because we use it for both formative and summative, so students can give each other feedback about what they understand. So I agree, a Flipgrid is a wonderful tool to do that. So thank you for that. These are all available for you, so you can come back to these things. So if things continue to get added, when you get the URL for this, all of these links are in there. So let's continue on. We're not going to do this activity, but I want to share it with you. There's another activity that we do extensively on our campus and with project-based learning called a student work protocol. And I want to show you this, but essentially we're looking for where is the link between instruction, assessment, and the learning that's happening. And so the way that this protocol looks is this. So again, there's a link for this. I'll post this in the chat for you. This is actually taken from Ron Richard, who's one of the team that is part of Harvard Project Zero and did the visible thinking work that's been part of their work for so long. And in his more recent book on cultures of thinking, he has this wonderful set of protocols to sort of, what do we do to engender deeper thinking? And so this protocol, if you look, has a teacher bring artifacts, student work, assessments, things that they've collected to measure learning. And as a team, we collectively with that teacher look at what they've brought. We discuss what they've brought. So I see drafts, I see drawings, I see, a research, scavenger hunt. I see these things. And we talk about what we see here that are indicators about student learning. We ask questions collegially about how we can make that work better. So these protocols are designed to make everyone better because they provide an opportunity for the teacher who's bringing the work to hear their colleagues question and wonder what they see there. But it makes us all sharper at looking at student work and thinking about, by what means do we collect evidence and how might we make that evidence even stronger to help us understand how to plan for instruction, how to design activities, how to know what kinds of assessment best suit what we want to do. Oh, I accidentally clicked on that document, but it'll look like this when you get it. My links are all over the place. Before we go to this next activity, I want to just mention again, the slides for this, if you want to access any of these documents later, is just this URL. I'm going to post that in the link right now, or in the chat window, the link for it. So I've PDF this presentation, and if you click on that link, it'll bring up a PDF version of all these, and all the hot links on here will work for you. Another activity that we're not going to do today, but I want to share with you the document because it has some valuable resources, is something that takes about an hour. We call it a jigsaw read. And so you might be familiar with this. We do this in our classroom all the time with students. We give them pieces of the whole, a jigsaw, and each student is responsible for becoming an expert on their part. And then collectively as a group, they reach consensus around. So the whole then means what? And so in doing this with teachers, it looks something like this. This is adapted from some work from Expeditionary Learning. Some of you might be familiar with their work. They've come here to Hawaii and worked with some schools in the past. So this protocol has folks go into teams, but then what I've given you here are 7 different readings that look at the question about assessment for learning. And some of them are about grades versus comments. Some of them are about how do we give effective feedback, but all of them are centered on that question about what formative assessment really is best for. So I'm going to share this link with you as well and post it into the chat. So for this document, but the reason that you might want this is some of these, if you're not familiar with some of these different articles, have some really good information and language. And when we do this with teachers, we typically have them then jigsaw their work together so to reach a consensus around here are some significant things that we can say about the ways that feedback and giving comments and when do we intervene and how frequently should we do it, we can get to a better place about how important and when we give that formative feedback to our learners. So I will leave you with that one to look at. There's one last activity here that I do want us to do. And so activity 4 of this 4 group of assessment things that we've done is called the Formative Assessment Marketplace, which is what this whole workshop was really designed to be based on. And so much like when you go to a marketplace and you see a lot of different places where people are selling their wares, the goal of doing an activity like this is to give everyone an opportunity to practice something and then try it. And so we're going to do it a little bit differently because this activity, again, normally if we do this as one thing, if we were face to face, we would have it a little bit different. The document is here. And so I'm going to post that if you want to see what the original version that wasn't abridged looks like. So it's there in the chat for you. And so the way we're going to do this is you can see here, I am going to ask you to find this document because there are a variety of formative assessment strategies that you might consider doing. Student discussion protocols, writing and reflection techniques, quick checks. There's a whole bunch of ones here that you might think about adding into your work. And so what we would normally have folks do is spend about a half an hour and really dive in and explore these and then actually take one and practice it with their group. Now, given the size of the group, we're not going to do it that way today. So we're going to do this a little bit different in an abridged form. So what I'm going to ask you to do is if you need me to, I'll post in the chat the links for these sites that have this, but I want to give you a couple of minutes to try and look at some of these are really quick things, like just things that we already maybe do in our practice, like an exit ticket. But there's a variety of more ones to get quick data or maybe more meaningful data to help us understand where are our students at. And then I've got another Padlet here that we're going to ask you, or I'm going to ask you to bring us together and find something that you think, wow, this is one I've heard about, but I've never tried. And I really think I want to try this one. So the Padlet is at this address. And so what I want to do is give you about 5 minutes to look at those sites. I'll start posting them in the link window and just pick one that you think might be interesting for you. You don't have to look at all of these because we don't have that time, but you'll have all of these available for you because you have access to the slides. And then I'd like you to go to the Padlet and tell us about one that it's like, boy, this is one that, you know, I've heard of this and I've never done it. This would be a good one for me to bring back into my work. And there's already some populated there because we've used this with a few other groups in the past. So the Padlet link is there, and I'm going to now take a little bit of time and send you the links if you need, if you can't download that document yourself right now. So while you're watching here, I'm going to copy and, oh, that didn't work. So there's one here about total participation techniques. So I'm posting that in the chat. So these are just a variety of strategies, master lists, interesting offerings from different materials that people have created. So this is actually from Ron Berger's book on learning that lasts. And he talks at length about the power of creating opportunities for students to discuss about what they think they know. Here's one more from that same thing that's more focused on writing and reflection. And so I'll post that here. You know, one of the things we oftentimes really can use to help us figure out how we're doing is if we're trying to figure out where our students are at or what quick checks we might implement. So here's a whole bunch of strategies that are on what quick checks you might try as a means. Maybe you've used some of these already, but maybe there's some there that you think, boy, I'd love to. One of the other experts that we use a lot in our work at Mid-Pacific is Sandra Herbst and Ann Davies. And so this is some of their triangulated work. They use biology as an example on this one. Well, what kinds of evidence might you collect? So you might want to look that one over. Here's an example of the thinking routines from Harvard Project Zero. So Ron Richards' work that we were talking about just a little while ago and the ways that you can use these. Well, that gave me a page not found. Here, I'll give you the main page and you can dive in from there. That link I thought I checked. And then the last one here is one called Classroom Assessment Techniques. So take a couple minutes and I'm going to now pull up the Padlet and let's see if, well, I didn't copy that right. Let me try that again. There. So I've posted all these links in the chat. And now let's jump to the Padlet. And my challenge to you is we've got about, 10 minutes left in our time. So I'd like to take about 5 minutes more. And if we go to that Padlet, which I gave you the address for, but let me go there myself now. What kinds of techniques might you try with your students? So for instance, you might see one of the links here takes you to these writing and reflection techniques and the idea of interactive writing. Teachers, together a group of students and teacher develop a short piece of writing to illustrate one particular idea. And so that's a opportunity to collect formative assessment, or maybe it's a students read or watch something, write a short response, share the response. So some of these are very simple techniques, but sometimes we forget that inserting these in the midst of the kinds of learning we're doing have power. So what things do you see there? Let's see if we can populate this this Padlet with a few of the ones that maybe, or if you've got one that you want to share with the group that you've already been using that you think is really powerful. One of the ones that I use extensively, and so I'm going to post that, is a thinking routine called Chalk Talk. One of the reasons I like Chalk Talk is because it's a quiet activity. And so it tends to allow the more quiet students in my class contribute equally so that someone who's a talkative sort or wants to commandeer the conversation when we're writing quietly on a common piece of paper, it tends to bring more student voice to everyone's work. And so the idea of something like that for me is a really powerful assessment strategy because I can bring more work into what we're doing, more of my student voice. I see someone writing about using whiteboards and holding it up. And again, we think about, if we're collecting evidence, we need to have a plan for how do we collect that from, if not all the students that we know today, I want to make sure I get from, A through F in my ELF, and tomorrow I'll make sure I collect something meaningful from G through M. So we may not get something from every student every day, but that's okay because we're looking for a longitudinal view of learning. And so if we've got powerful formative assessment strategies, we have ways to have that collected, and we've got evidence because of course we're always trying to, in the end, when we finally put a grade, when we put a letter, when we put a summative to this work, then we're always asking ourselves, by what means, by what evidence do I have clarity that this student has achieved mastery or an acceptable level or is still missing some areas. So where is that evidence that's mapped to specific learning outcomes? So we'll take 3 minutes more and see what other things maybe, if you look at those, that you might get excited by. I see someone writing about tell, show, do, and that idea of, having students and think about, if I'm using an instructional model of I'm going to tell them about something, I'm going to show them what that looks like, and then I'm going to have them do it. How might at each one of those steps, might the students be capturing evidence? How do I know they were paying attention when I was telling? How do I know that they were with me when I was showing? Even there might be opportunities to do that. I know one of the pieces of work after working closely with our elementary school that's really helped us build a better understanding is before we start something is giving students an opportunity to write down what they think before we start and then write down after what they acquired. So we do a lot of, I used to think, now I think. And so those kinds of thinking routines where students are tracking their own learning and they're becoming better at understanding this is where I started today's class, now here's where I ended. Those kinds of reporting mechanisms are powerful ways for the students to make the connections to what happened today, but just as powerfully, they're important for us to collect that information as well. And I am looking in the chat in case as you're looking at things, if there's questions that come up here, because I know it's 2:30 in the afternoon and I want to make sure that, you've probably had some sessions today, but I wanted to give you some things that would make you also interact with this material a little bit. So I hope you're okay that I'm giving you some time to think about, what are strategies that you are thinking about in your work so that we can talk about this as a collective group. If we were doing this face to face, the next step for us would be to literally walk through the room and do what we call speed dating. You pair up with someone and each of you has 1 minute to talk about something that you got excited about, and then the other person tell you what they are. So this idea of how do we share something that's got us excited, how do we build on each other's ideas is a significant part of broadening our thinking around, what this kind of assessment practice looks like. So we've got about 5 minutes left in our time here right now. And I want to make sure there's at least a chance for you to give questions. I do have a feedback form if you're willing to go in. I'll post a link here about just, the session and what worked for you and maybe things you would like to have seen. But I'd like you to consider in the time we've got left, I'll monitor the chat right now. And you've also got, because there's only, I'm trying to see how many, there's 15 of us in the room. So if you want to turn on your mic and ask a question with your microphone, you can do that. But I'd like you to consider, what's something either you like from what you saw here. We looked at 4 different protocols: a fishbowl, a student work protocol, a jigsaw, and a marketplace approach. All of these are ways to help us deepen our thinking about formative assessments. So is there something there you like, or is there something that you wish, either from this or from your own work, or what's a wondering you have? So I invite you to push me to think a little bit and help you think more deeply about this right now with the 5 minutes we've got left. And I can see some more people have added. So I see Storyboard That as a website that allows students to create comic strip-like characters. So that's a wonderful way to get students to use both sides of their brain, right? Their right side, the creative side, and that left side, the analytical, and that needs both of those things in order to be put together. So thank you for thinking about that one. It's awful quiet there, but I understand sometimes we're still thinking, so I'll give a minute more of wait time. I see someone mentioned Nearpod as an assessment practice. We were working with some teachers this past summer, and Nearpod became a powerful tool for them. And I agree what you said here about to check understanding, doing polls, and you can track individual students and whether they're contributing. So a tool like Nearpod is really powerful in supporting the means that you want to collect evidence that students are considering, thinking, planning, applying the information. I see someone here talked about using the go around. What's one or two words to describe their level? And so one of those things that we want to try to create are environments where students, you know, the thumb-o-meter, fist to five, what are ways that we can quickly, even if we're virtual, to get from everyone that? I love, there's a question from Miriam in the chat about how do you assess social interaction with total distance students? And so one of the things that, there's a couple of strategies I'll share with you that I've seen teachers use and that I've used with the workshops. You know, that one of the easier ways to do it is with breakout rooms because in creating smaller groups, I can give students a task that they need to do. And then I can go and monitor those conversations. So if I've got 5 breakout rooms with 5 students in each one, I can quickly jump between and get a sense and have within that group, I almost always assign a note taker so that someone is keeping track of who's contributing to the conversation, what are they saying. So that's one way. But I know for some of us, we're not using tools. There was a wonderful seminar that I saw that showed even in Google Meet, you can create individual Google Meets and then create a single document for you to look at so you can see all the meets happening at the same time. But even if you've just got your students in one synchronous virtual space, one of the strategies I've seen is breaking the class into certain groups and everyone else turns off their camera and one group interacts with each other on a prompt. And then they turn off their camera and then another group, okay, group B, turn on your cameras. Now it's your turn, respond to this question. And then you get to see how they interact with that. In a sense, it acts like a fishbowl because the smaller group becomes the focus. Everyone else still needs to pay attention, much like a Socratic circle, where for them, they're giving feedback about how well did group B do? What was something you can say? And that's something students can keep track. So I can monitor the social interaction with the active group, but still collect evidence from the other groups because they need to stay connected so that they can summarize what they heard from those groups. Since the prompts are different, each one I can get that information. So those are a couple strategies I've seen with social interaction. Miriam, I also know that there's cases where in some schools, only certain groups of students go online on certain days. So thinking about who's online and what those online students are doing and making sure that at least over the course of maybe a week cycle, each student is involved in some kind of interaction with some group of peers, because this isn't something we have to collect the same thing every day. But what we just want to make sure is over the course of weeks, we don't wait until 3 weeks in to collect some evidence of whether students are engaged. So designing for collecting that matters. It's 2:45. Our time is up for this because I know you want to have time. There's one more session today. You know, again, the goal for this was we wanted to address, you know, what kinds of ways can we think about broadening our use of formative assessments, both face-to-face and virtually. The slide deck is, again, at this iTeach808 FAM. The work that we do at Cooper Hole Academy is right there on the URL. If you're interested in finding us, we're running free workshops every few weeks on different topics. Our next one coming up is in February is on the topic of how do we keep students engaged in virtual and hybrid classrooms. So you're welcome to join us for that. So thank you. I appreciate you being here for the session. I hope you got something useful out of it.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark, for sharing your knowledge. That was a lot of good content. Okay, and so we'd like to thank everyone too for participating. And there will be a link to an evaluation sent to you in a few days. And so once again, thank you, Mark, and everybody have a good last session. Okay, take care.